Agdi Vogus Falcha. Hi, hello, and welcome to John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School. And we have a question today about the death of deities. It's a fascinating one, so I'll read out the question and then we'll share some perspective on it. So it comes in from Tyson, who previously asked a question in May, and says your response is still helpful. So I'm really, really glad to hear that. Thank you very much. Um, as I've continued to progress through my studies with the Irish Pagan School and scholastic texts, there is something that still weighs on my mind. I'm hoping that you and Laura might be able to help with the concepts behind the death of deities. Throughout the myths and tales of Ireland, we read about the death of Lu, Nuada, and in some cases the Dagda. This can be a little confusing as it appears these deities have carried into the other world. Would that remove them from the status of deity? Perhaps I'm not quite grasping how the deaths allow them to maintain the divine aspects we read about throughout the myths. I appreciate the thought and time you've taken to read this, Tyson. It's a great question, Tyson, and thank you very much for sharing it. So it's a bit of a multifaceted one, which is why I thought I'd kind of take a bit of time and talk through it there. Um, and yeah, unlike some other pantheons out there, we actually have stories of Irish gods or Irish deities dying, being killed, but also in some cases coming back from the dead or appearing in another manifestation of form or self or even being reborn over time in different bodies and forms and eventually being reborn again as like in a human form. So I kind of touched on a lot of that in the video I did a while ago on the channel there called The Transmigration of Spirit. So if you're interested in that, it might kind of answer some of this question and go over there because there is this cyclical nature to the death and rebirth and the ongoing continuance of the energy of a lot of these entities. Um, so what it really comes down to then is this status of deity and this divinity and what is it that gives them their divine aspects. The reason why I wanted to kind of dive on that one, interestingly, as a topic, as an aspect of this particular question, is that even though the Tuatha De Danann are referred to as the gods of Ireland, the tribe of the gods of Ireland, um, there's only two of them that are specifically mentioned as God or as a god in the lore. So to kind of track it back to the beginning a little bit, we need to kind of look at where the Tuatha De Danann come from and why are they the gods of Ireland and not the other people or tribes of our histories and our mythology? Um, which is a really, really good question and something I have considered through many different avenues of kind of bardic exploration in my own brain. But just to kind of come back to the point, there's only two. Even though we have the Tuatha De Danann, and you mentioned Lou, Nuada, Bridget, Gwivnu, Deankecht, Armage, like Lukta, Krejna, Oma, all of these very, very prominent names and individuals, there's only two that are actually specifically mentioned as being a god or goddess in the lore. And that is, interestingly enough, the Morrigan and the Dagda. So the Morrigan is referred to as a goddess in the Dinhenicus, which is the lore of names and places. The Dagda is referred to directly, actually has the name put upon him by Nuada. And to kind of briefly dive into that aspect of the story, it's when Nuada abdicates the kingship of Ireland in favor of Lou, who has recently turned up and has all of these abilities and skills that Nuada and a lot of the others consider the right man for the job when they're looking at this coming conflict of the second battle of Moytura. So what happens is that there's a gathering. So Nuada kind of gathers a whole lot of influential people off, and it's referred to as the meeting of the goddess. And they have this council for a year where they kind of plan and talk about, what is everyone going to bring to the table? What are they going to do with this Fomorian invasion? How are they going to deal with it? How are they going to kind of rally up the people again to survive and to kind of get back to stability, because the instability was brought about by Bress. So really kind of it goes into a lot of it, and there's all of these different individuals, like from cupbearers, sorcerers, druids, and everyone, and they promise a whole lot of feats and skills and abilities, from hiding all the rivers of lakes of Ireland so that no Fomorian will be able to get a drink of water, that a thirst would be upon them all. To call in the names of the mountains, and by their names the mountains would throw themselves bodily upon the Fomorians. um, or kind of bringing fire down from the sky, and interestingly binding the urine inside both the men and horses of the Fomorians, so that sickness would come upon them, and that every breath would diminish them and weaken them, whereas every breath of the Tuatha Danann would increase their valor, even if the battle were to last for 7 years. So all of these things are promised, all of these great feats from the cupbearers and sorcerers and druids and everyone kind of listing out what they're going to bring to the table. But it's at this point that Dagda actually steps up and he says, listen, everything you promised, I will take upon and do myself. Now, for anyone else, that might seem like a bit of a brag. But interestingly enough, Nuada straight away says, yep, everything that's been promised, that is it, you've taken upon yourself. And this is where he actually refers to him as the Dagda. He says, because you are the Dagda, you are the good god of Druidry. And it's said then that the name stuck to him from then on. So what's interesting about that is that we've always had the Dagda coming through in these stories. From the four treasures of the Tuatha Danann that were brought out of the four great cities, Fallius, Findius, Murius, and Gorius, and these four cities that the Tuatha Danann came out of on their journey into Ireland. One of the treasures of Murius is, in fact, the cauldron called the Cauldron of the Dagda. So there's this odd kind of conflict, because we have the name of the Cauldron of the Dagda on this treasure that is brought out of the land, but then we also, like a good while later, have him being actively named as the Dagda, and the name stuck to him from then on. So it does mean that we have this oddness about this status of deity. What is it that makes a deity like a deity? In all of the abilities of, like, say, Dean Hecht, his capabilities in medicine and surgery to kind of build a prosthesis arm for Nuada when his arm is cut off, or to create the fountains, or the what's it called? It's kind of a cauldron of healing, and it's not specifically a cauldron. It's almost like a Fullocht Fia dug into the ground. They make a well, a healing well, with all of the herbs and the incantations to anyone put into it will have their wounds restored. Even if it was a mortal wound put upon them, they would have it restored. So we have this ability of significant healing that is very listed clearly in the stories. Technically, a mortal wound is game over. Like, you can have any other kind of wound, and you'll eventually, like, deal with it and walk it off. But a mortal wound will kill you. It just will. But we have seen that Deankecht has the ability to heal mortal wounds through this well of healing. But then also Dean's son, Miach, has the ability to heal mortal wounds straight away without the need for a well of healing. And we see that when Deankecht gets into it over the restoration of Nuada's actual arm, his physical blood arm. So Miach outstrips Deankecht's ability. Deankecht kind of loses his shit over it, to be honest, and attacks Miach and ends up putting all of these wounds on him, and then Miach heals it. Even a mortal wound, like a head wound, is supposed to be dead instantly, but Miach heals a mortal wound on his head, and that forces Deankecht to go all the way and slay his son. So anyway, when we talk about these wounds and these harms and these damage that's done to them, where are the deaths? Where are these actual deaths? So when we look at the Nuada, for example, we get to that Moytura part 2, the second battle of Moytura, and Lugh is kind of the leader of the fight. But once the fight is over, the Morrigan is performing the poetry and the recognition of what has actually occurred, and the Morrigan lists that amongst the dead is Nuada and his wife Macha. Now, of course, we see Macha turn up again later on in the Ulster cycle, as she kind of like comes out of the other world and weds a man, and then is bearing him children, and ends up having to foot race 2 horses which then leads to the curse placed upon the Ulster for 9 generations, that the men, because no one would advocate for her on her behalf amongst the king and all the ruling men of Ulster, that they would then have the sickness, the bed sickness of pregnancy upon them in times when Ulster would need it. So we have Macha being listed amongst the dead in the Second Battle of Moytura, but then we have her coming out of the other world later on. Similar with Lugh. Lugh is actually interestingly slain by the grandsons of the Dagda. So Dagda's son Kermit has a tryst with Lugh when he's king in Ireland for 40 years. And the Kermit is slain. This kind of leads to the story of how the Dagda gets the staff, the club, which restores life and death. And that brings Kermit back from the dead. But the harm and the slight is remembered by Kermit's 3 sons. And then later on, they pursue and attack Lugh, and then he flees from them carrying wounds into a lake where he drowns. He is then recovered from the lake and he's buried on Uisneach. Again, though, we see him turn up later in the stories with the Ulster cycle and the birth and conception and arrival of Cuchulainn, who is said to be a son of Lugh, a demigod in essence. But we have both Lugh's influence around him. There's a section where Lugh actually takes the battle for him, where Cuchulainn is just not able to it. And as the warriors arrive, they see a figure standing, kind of defying them, and it's not Cuchulainn, but it's Lugh. There's another story where a part of the story where Cuchulainn is going to train for his warrior feats. He gets lost in a magical mist, and then he is carried out of that magical mist to Scothach's Island. And it's said that it's Lugh in a different form who carries him through that otherworld journey to bring him out on the other side. So we have time and again this deities who are listed as dead, or well, these characters, again, because again the word God only technically applies to the Morrigan and the Dagda, but the other ones have all of their abilities. So this is where we need to look at the other world. The other world is said to be another life. Another kind of name for it is On Sale Ella, the other life. And so it's almost like this alternate dimension that exists in parallel to our world. And as we see in other stories, it's not bound to the same laws of time and place as ours are, as our world is. From the story of Nera, again with the Ulster cycle, he journeys out at Samhain, actually, which is kind of when I'm around Samhain, I'm recording this video. And he goes on this journey. Literally, an Octra is the word for this journey. It leads him into the other world. He then comes back to Cruachan and he sees it destroyed by a she host. He follows that she host back into the she in Cruachan, and he's then brought before the king of the She of Cruachan, and the king says, listen, go into that house and live with that woman, and then every day bring firewood for my fire. And so that's what he does. Like, he has a house, he lives with the woman, and they have a union, they have a child, and he has cattle there. And then one day, after almost a year living there, he sees something and he's like, this is very, very odd. And the woman in the house says, listen, you need to actually leave. You need to kind of go out. And he's like, there's nothing out there for me anymore. And she's like, actually, there is. Cruachan hasn't been destroyed. It's still there. And the people are still sitting around the same fire that you left. And he's like, but they won't believe me. And she says, take the summer fruits from outside and bring them with you. So he then leaves out, having lived an entire year in the other world. And it's as if an hour or even less than an hour has passed in our world. And of course, everyone, all of these heroes, Maeve and Allard, and actually the exiles of Ulster who've joined at that time, they were like, yeah, it's a great story, but we can't believe you. And then he takes out of his pocket these summer fruit, even though it's late fall or autumn by the time we get to Samhain. And that proves the truth of it, which then means there's a foreknowledge that there will be an attack on Maeve's seat of power in Rathcrohan from the She and Cruachan. And the next year, when it comes around and this attack is supposed to happen, the warriors of Connacht and the exiles of Ulster actually go in and attack the She and Cruachan himself instead. So it's a great example how time is very much different in this other life, in this On Sale Ella. Another example of that is Oisin and the story of Tir na Nog. There's literally an island out there known as the Island of the Ever Young, the Tir Na Nog, which is the land of ever youth or eternal youth. So Usheen kind of travels over there on a horse. He unions with a she woman. They have kids. They're living their best lives forever. But he has a longing or a missing for the Fianna, like for his father Fionn and the warriors. So he gets back on the horse and travels back into Ireland. And it turns out that hundreds of years have passed. And this is where we get the tales of the oceanic cycle, is how it's referred to, because it said that he, in trying to help someone, a farmer, move a boulder in his farm, falls out of the horse, and all of the years that had been abated from him by living in Tir na Nog came upon him in one go. Um, in one version of that story, he apparently lives long enough to relate the story to the local priest who writes them all down, and is said to have received last rites to, die a good Catholic death, and be welcomed into heaven because he was baptized and received last rites. This oceanic hero. Now, again, we know narratives and how kind of the stories are changed to kind of suit a certain circumstance or a certain intentionality. But what's interesting is it's the fact that there is this way to live forever in the other world. So to loop back around to the question then, death and the divine aspect throughout the myths, as we've kind of shown there through the little bit of a chat, death in the Irish tradition isn't exactly the end. From transmigration of spirits, as in being born again, like Eton, who was born multiple times over, um, it's and Cuchulainn again, who's born multiple times to be manifested. If we want to look at Rucht and Frucht, the two pig keepers who go down through the ages, being born again and again and again in many different forms, transmigration of spirit is something that's core to the Irish spiritual belief, or these kind of particular spiritual beliefs. So the aspects of divinity, then, we've only two of them who are listed as gods, but the rest of the two of the Danann are as a tribe that came back into Ireland in the same way that the Firbolg did, in the same way that the Milesians eventually do, and the Gaels are descended from. So instead of having this separate ideology of gods, deities, in this like Olympian circumstance, or actually I'm stepping outside of my lane there. I'm going to just not talk about other circumstances. When it comes to the Irish gods, they're very much present in all of our stories and very much present in the other world, which is right beside Ireland. Ireland is kind of this crossing over point between our world and the other world in many different ways, and still is in my personal experiences. When it comes to the deities themselves, it's not like they are separate kind of immortal entities living on high and looking down at us from other areas. They're very much integrated and connected with us, almost like ancestral spirits, through all of their teachings and their messages down to us. What I will also say is that depending on your focus and your understanding of circumstance, who's to say that they're actually gods at all? I have considered all of these things myself, and it's something that I have eventually kind of reconciled, because people often ask me, like, well, what if the Dagda didn't actually exist, and you're just kind of espousing all of these values and everything else that for someone who isn't actually a god? And I have I consider that, absolutely do. And if my belief and my spiritual focus is directed towards an individual who doesn't actually exist and isn't actually a god, it still encourages me to be a better person, to follow the ideals of hospitality and like compassion, emotional intelligence, all of these things that I have found through my exploration of relationship with the Dagda and the Irish mythology and the scholastics, the texts themselves, through breaking down this character, to exploring all of these narratives, to kind of chewing out and absorbing as much of the information of the Irish mythology as I could. I have reached a space where I believe I'm functioning as a much better person because I'm emulating values that I have collected from the stories of this individual, the story of this character. And even if it is a fictitious character made up by narratives and all the rest of it, I'm still doing no harm. I'm still kind of encouraging better beliefs. I'm still kind of espousing values of righteousness, right relationship, personal sovereignty, emotional awareness and emotional intelligence, which all really functions and fits for me as an individual. So even if after his 80 years ruling, following the demise of Lugh, after his 40 years of ruling, the Dagda technically died, I'm still following a path which encourages me to be a better person. I'm still exploring all of these aspects of myself through the story and the narrative of that experience, which is provided for me. Now, what I have experienced is goes outside of myself. That is where, I will say that I have had spiritual experiences that are in no way could have come from inside of me, or inside of my experience or my recognition. That's how my belief and my understanding of him as a deity and as a presence, an experienced presence, comes from. Even though we have the stories of him technically dying. But when the Milesians arrive, actually, to roll that out, the Dagda is said to have suffered a wound in the Second Battle of Moytura, which killed him, a mortal wound. But he's then also said to have lived for 80 years. And when the Milesians arrive and took over Ireland and the Tuatha Danann went into the Hollow Hills, Ireland becomes this wasteland. It becomes this kind of terrible circumstance where no grain will grow and no kine or cattle will give milk. And the only way the Milesians can restore this famine and this horror of on the landscape is to make friends with the Dagda. It literally says they have to make friends with the Dagda, and then Ireland returns to a state of abundance, a state of growth, and a state of you know health and like balance and right relationship. So I don't know if this answers the question for you, Tyson, but I think really what it comes down to is the exploration of the idea of death. Death in an Irish tradition with the Irish mythology and the Irish kind of spirituality is not the end. It is not just that's it, book closed, game over. And we see that through the many examples I've actually listed so far. So as much as we have stories of death, they don't exactly stick. um, so really what we're looking at is this idea of divinity and the status of deity. So what is it that defines someone as deity? What is it that defines someone by this status or divine aspects? And in the Irish kind of circumstance and pantheon, it would seem to be their ability to be of broad use and support and care for their community and for their tribe. There is another kind of aspect of exploration there, and it's one I have difficulty with, and I'm specifically putting this at the end of the video for those of you who have stayed around. I don't kind of expose this very okay. I'm always careful when it comes to this because it can really be taken out of context, and I have heard of some individuals really take it too far. Um, but there is a supposition that of all of the individuals listed in the Tuatha Danann, there are only two who are specifically listed as deity. And oddly enough, both of them have the in front of their name, the Dagda and the Morrigan. So if you're actually referring to them specifically, it's on Dagda or on Morrigan. You don't just say, I am Morrigan this or Dagda that. It's the Dagda and the Morrigan rather specifically. And this then puts it into a context of a titular circumstance. Is it a title that is put upon someone, as we have seen with Nuada putting the name of the Dagda on the Dagda, and that's the name that stuck to him from then on. So is it possible that there are individuals, heroes, champions, people down through the ages who function in the role of that aspect or that need of the culture and of the community? So is it possible that there have been many the Dagdas, there have been many the Morrigans? Um, Now, again, you can see where this could begin to spiral off into very kind of like scary circumstances. And I have come across people in a neo-pagan standing who claim to be the embodiment of a deity. I find that difficult. I actually do. And I've had people turn around to me and say, yeah, you're the Dagda. And I'm like, whoa, 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 slow the roll here. I'm the bard. I'm the storyteller. For some people, I am the priest that they need at that particular time, and that's the service that my community needs of me. That is just the name, and if that, I get uncomfortable when I'm called priest. I really, really do. Um, but if that is a title or a term that allows someone to reconcile the service that I can provide to them as a member of the community, then okay, I'm happy to that. But I won't refer to myself to it. I don't make a thing of that. That's it's a complex word to use, especially in a post-Catholic circumstance that I have grown up in Ireland. Um, so this idea that there could be other individuals, there could be, this title of service or this title of kind of requirement that is placed upon someone to fulfill a need for the community, then just takes the idea of death even further out of the mix. Because if it's something that is placed upon a name or a title for service in a particular aspect on a different individual, then whether one individual dies or not, there is and could possibly be another individual who becomes the Dagda to take up that kind of calling, to take up the cauldron and to carry it on forward. So now, again, I'm not saying that that is what I firmly believe. I have had personal experiences with a rather unique energy that I define and I understand as Dagda, as the Dagda in my life. So it's an awkward one, but I wanted to include it there as part of this discussion because you might come across it out there in the wild worlds of the virtual internet space or even in other pagan spaces. Um, this kind of titular circumstance where people just take it on board and define themselves as the deity. Now, again, I've done a video on invocation and evocation, as in invoking the name of a deity into a practice or wait, hold on. Evoking them into a practice or invoking them into a form or self. But that's a different kind of ritualistic thing as well. Check out the video in the YouTube if you're interested on that. But I do hope, Tyson, that this has answered your question. Death, in essence, really doesn't stick when it comes to the Irish gods. Even Chalk Dun, the House of the Dead, it's seen more of a hostel. It's seen more of a stopping over point where, they go to in between their iterations or their transmigrations of spirit. So it's not like there is just you're dead and you're gone. So it's been a great experience for me to kind of go through and explore this question and to bend the brain around the multiple different tales and narratives. I hope this has given some insight to you, Tyson, for the answering of the question, but also to anyone else who has wrangled with the idea of dead deities or death when it comes to the Irish deities. So if this has been useful, do me a favor, maybe hit the thumbs up there on that. If you have something that you'd like to question, follow on, throw it in the comments. I do like to go through and pick out those. And if there is something that I said that doesn't seem to make sense, question that too, because the only way that we improve and grow and expand our knowledge is by questioning and then exploring the path to find the answers. So from me here in the Irish Pagan School, this has been John O'Sullivan, Gurav Mila Mahakas. Thank you very much. And until next time, Slán. Goodbye.